black holes, right? So black holes basically are the most extreme case of the warping or the curvature of space-time, right? So when there is something which has such high density that you can almost think of it like perforating, like piercing through the space-time fabric itself, and so much curvature being there that nothing, not even light, can escape from it. That is what we talk about as black holes, right? Now, whether black holes was discussed, right, in the sense of physics of it or the metaphysics of it in the Indian traditions is a question that is not quite, I would say, framed or to be conceptualized in that way. I would rather address the problem of singularities, right? Singularities have been looked at both from an immanent empirical sense, from a metaphysical sense, right? And from a very, very ontological kind of perspective also, from the very foundation, so to say, right? Now, you gave some terms, which is the Mahakalpa. You spoke about the Ananta Shesha. There are various other Puranic tales as well which talk about it. So, when we talk about the Mahakalpa, right, there is this aspect of cosmic creation and dissolution, right? And how does that happen, right? So, we say that in scientific aspects, there is this concept of the big bounce, okay, big bounce. What is a big bounce? The big bounce is basically when you have the Big Bang, right? The Big Bang gave rise to everything we see. It expanded, it persisted, and then the theory is, it again ties back to the cyclic cosmology model. Everything will again go back into a singularity, right? The big crunch, so to say, big crunch, right? Now, gravitational collapse and how it happens is a matter of debate still. It's not something we in physics have kind of spoken about, as the conventional way of thinking about it, because at the moment the universe has been seen to be just expanding. It's accelerated expansion that we talk about, and what will happen afterwards is purely speculative, right? It's not something we can establish even, for that matter, right? So Mahakalpa and how this transition happens is a question where the mediation of a potential singularity, right? Because if something has come out of nothing, or at least appearance of something which is very localized, logically speaking, it should again go back to a certain point of singularity, right, and so on and so forth, right? That is a very logical construction, right? But whether that is a physical or the scientific construction is speculative still, right? Now, in the Ananta Shesha, when we talk about this aspect of the Ananta Shesha, it's a very interesting way in which it is the motif or the representation is shown, right? So there is a cyclic recurrence, the way the coil of Ananta Shesha is oriented, right? And so how some people have proposed that it looks like a event horizon of this black hole which is present, and in fact in the Milky Way we do have at the very center of the Milky Way there is a black hole, right? That's what is being discussed in scientific circles, and that is giving rise to a lot of things, right? Now, a question is, if a black hole is consuming everything, how is it being creative? How is it creating something, right? Now, one simple resolution of that is obviously given because of Stephen Hawking's work. So he spoke about Hawking radiation. So when things are taken in by the black hole and there is a randomization of state, right, the randomization of all that we see around in terms of the states of the system, there is also an outpouring or an emanation, radiation of a certain kind, which is randomized again, but there are certain things that come out of it. Now, there is also a theory that a black hole is actually bridged, it creates a bridge, right, which is a wormhole. There's a concept of a wormhole which goes out into a white hole, right, and there's a bridge. There are even advanced theories which say that quantum entanglement, which we spoke about, quantum entanglement actually creates certain kinds of Einstein-Rosen bridges, right, which are basically these bridges that I was talking about. But again, these are purely speculative because we do not have a way to kind of firstly explore a black hole, right, and which is unfortunately why Stephen Hawking didn't get a Nobel Prize as much as he should have potentially. And again, on the quantum side, we cannot see whether the entangled particles are actually creating a black hole ER bridge, an Einstein-Rosen bridge or not, right? Now, there is also a very interesting story from the Bhagawat Puran, right, when Hiranyaksha, right, he actually took the earth, the whole kind of earth, and then in the Garbhodaka ocean, he kind of took it very deep inside, and then he tried to kind of pull it back inside into the ocean itself, right? And Vishnuji, Srihari Vishnu, he came ahead with the Varaha avatar, right? Which is why we often see that he, with his tusks of the Varaha avatar, is lifting the earth, right? So again, that kind of is a certain imagery of how the singularity, right, a certain kind of aspect of pulling it down and the regeneration from it, right, or the saving of it from that singularity has been spoken about, right? And so, well, you could say that it is a very high curvature space-time, but I wouldn't go that far, because it's clearly a metaphorical, potentially metaphorical resonant aspect, but it's not quite physically in that same way, you know, something we should be discussing. We should be kind of,
hard to imagine.
yeah, it's hard to imagine, and I don't think they were discussing it at that level beyond a point, right? Because it was more of, because when you are doing poetry, when you have a poetic understanding, it encompasses a number of different dimensions, right? Spiritual, immanent, you know, and conceptual, and so on and so forth, right? So that kind of has to be looked at. So when you talk about Devi Bhagawat Puran, this idea of pralaya actually takes everything that we see back into the avyakta, that which is not expressed, that which is undifferentiated, right? And we see that in quantum field theory as well, right? When we speak about this dissolution of all the excitations back into the fundamental fields, right? Now, one can say that in terms of the immanent particulate nature, right, it is removing that particulate nature and taking it back to its fundamental aspect, right? Now, this, whether this can be spoken of as a conceptual singularity, right, or a statistical singularity even, or a singularity of degrees of freedom, right, is not quite right, because even the field itself has a degree of freedom. It has a latent degree of freedom, right? But in Advaita Vedanta, when we talk about Brahman, that is definitely a singularity of sorts. Because there we are not talking about any degree of freedom. We are saying that it cannot even be articulated. It cannot be even rationalized or related in terms of any articulation for that matter, right? So definitely when we talk about Advaita Vedanta, right, that is a field, so to say. I won't even call it a field, right, because it's something beyond description, right? And that is a very beautiful way of thinking about it. It's the ontological black hole. Right? It's a black hole. Yeah, it's an ontological black hole, right? Because it's a black hole which is beyond all expansions, degrees of freedom, descriptions, articulations, right? So one can talk about it in that way. In Jain philosophy, again, this aspect of anekantavad, right? You know, how this relates to what is the reality as such, right? Even in the aspect of Buddhism, when we talk about this idea of shunyata. So when you say pratitya samutpada and dependent origination, the question is, what is real then? Right? So that question itself, according to them, is a moot question. It's not something that can be answered, right? In fact, one thing which people often say is that I like to see Buddhism as not a negation of Vedanta or Hinduism per se. Buddhism is talking at a certain realm where it is not quite addressing the realm beyond the level of negating. And this level of negating has been done in the Hindu parampara as well. It has been done by neti neti, right? When you talk about that which it is not. But what is beyond is something which Buddha never quite addressed, right? But that does not mean it may not be there, right? So when there is a famous story which is that one day one bhakta, he came to Buddha and said, is there no God, right? Buddha smiled. In the evening, somebody says, is there a God? And Buddha still smiled. He did not answer either of them. He neither posited it nor did he negate it. So does that mean that there is no position that you can take? Does that mean that there is no negation that you can take? That question itself was never addressed, right? So when you say shunyata, I like to think of it as that empirical singularity, again the ontological singularity, but whether there is something at a different realm, different level of existence and understanding is a question that I don't think Buddhism addresses, right? And I think Vedanta addresses in a slightly different way, but the way to get there with neti neti still is looking at a singularity. It is nothing, none of the things that you see around you, not this, not this, not this, not this, infinite regress, none of them, right? Which means there is a singularity of what it is. right? And that is where the tricky part comes in, essentially, right? So how do you kind of even discuss about that, right? So in the Lingodbhava, episode of the Linga Puran, there's a very interesting story, right, which is that of the Jyotirlinga. Okay, and there was a discussion when there was this aspect of there was a discussion going on between Sri Hari Vishnu and Brahmadev, right, about, I think, the primacy of who is more prominent and more kind of has more agency and things on that front. And usually when such discussions happen, as we know, the resolution is found in Shivji, right? So they ended up going to Shivji, and then Shivji said, okay, well, what I will do is I will expand in this Jyotirlinga, right, which is so high and so low as well in terms of the expansion aspect of it, that he asked them to find the end of it. Yeah, he asked them to find the end of it, right? And he said that, tell me, I mean, where is my end? Where is the end of my expansion? And of course, they couldn't find that, right? So in the case of determinacy of expansion, right, spatial and temporal and so on and so forth, that was a very beautiful way in which Shivji showed that he is that singularity. He is a singularity of conceptualization. You cannot conceptualize it within the spatial and temporal aspects as such, right? In the Mahabharata, when we talk about the Srimad Bhagavad Gita and Sri Krishna's Vishwarupa, right? Even in that, they have this way in which he gives this Sri Krishna gives this overwhelming form of infinite universes in him, right? And so Arjuna sees that the dissolution happens, and everything comes from thereof, right? So while Indian knowledge systems may not have given the exact definition of black holes in the sense we know it in physics, but the concept of singularities at the level of ontology, epistemology was definitely there.